On the early morning of July 18, 2024, the tranquility of the city of Córdoba was interrupted by a disappearance that, in the following hours, would turn into a brutal homicide case. Catalina Gutiérrez, a 21-year-old woman, was supposed to meet her friends that night for a casual gathering. But time passed, and Catalina never reached her destination. Unanswered messages, ignored calls. What seemed like a simple delay quickly turned into a sign of danger. The first signs that something was wrong emerged when her family and friends tried to track her phone. The last location pointed to a remote area in the Ampliación Kennedy neighborhood, a little-traveled area at that time of night. Upon arriving, the police found a disturbing scene. The Renault Clio belonging to Catalina's mother was parked by the roadside, with dark marks on the bodywork, evidence of a failed attempt to set it on fire. The real horror, however, was inside the vehicle. In the back seat, motionless and lifeless, lay Catalina Gutiérrez. Her body, placed in an unusual manner, suggested that it had been placed there after the attack. The first signs pointed to extreme violence, but the motive for the crime and the identity of the perpetrator remained a mystery. At the Enaudi neighborhood police station, friends and family anxiously awaited news, fearing the worst. Catalina's father's phone rang. On the other end, an officer confirmed what no one wanted to hear. Despair overtook the room. Shouts, tears, disbelief. The young woman, full of life just hours earlier, was now the victim of a brutal crime with no apparent explanation. What happened to Catalina between the moment she left home and the discovery of her body? Who was behind this crime? The answer was closer than anyone imagined, hidden behind the facade of an old friend and a sick obsession about to be revealed. To understand the tragedy of Catalina Gutiérrez, it is necessary to know who she was. Not just a university student, but a young woman who seemed to have a bright future ahead. Catalina was born and raised in Córdoba, Argentina, in an upper-middle-class family. Her father, Marcelo Gutiérrez, was a respected architect in the city, responsible for major projects. Her mother, Eleanor, was a dedicated homemaker, and her older sister, Lucia, was one of her closest confidants. Since childhood, Catalina stood out for her charismatic personality. She was cheerful, outgoing, surrounded by friends and admirers. Her talent for communication made her shine on social media, where she accumulated over 100,000 followers on Instagram and TikTok. What started as a hobby quickly turned into a side career. Catalina promoted parties, fashion products, and travel experiences. She was seen at events, documenting moments from her daily life, and frequently posted videos with her inseparable dog, Kimba. But behind the glamour of social media, there was a young woman with concrete aspirations. Following in her father's footsteps, she entered the Faculty of Architecture at the National University of Córdoba. She divided her time between her studies and her growing digital influence, balancing two worlds. To her followers, she was just an ordinary girl sharing parties, friends, and trips. But to someone in her close circle, Catalina was more than that. She was an obsession. Days before her death, Catalina continued her routine as usual, unaware that she was being watched. On July 13th, she announced her presence at a party, just like many other times. On July 15th, she celebrated Argentina's victory in the Copa America with her friends. On July 17th, she posted her last content, an invitation to a party the following Saturday. That would be the last record of her life. None of those posts suggested that anything was wrong. There was no hint that Catalina was in danger. But while she lived her life normally, someone around her was feeding a dark desire, someone who, soon, would decide that if he couldn't have her, no one else could. The night of July 17, 2024, promised to be another ordinary moment in Catalina Gutiérrez's life. As with so many other occasions, she had planned to go out with her friends. The plan was simple: a dinner followed by a bowling game at Patio Olmos, one of the busiest shopping malls in Córdoba. For Catalina, it wasn't just a distraction. With the end of the winter break approaching, it would be one of her last opportunities for leisure before returning to the intense routine of architecture school. Just before 7 p.m., she asked her mother to lend her the car to meet up with her friends more comfortably. At first, Eleanor hesitated. She suggested that Catalina stay at home and use the night to study. But Catalina insisted she didn't want to miss out on the outing with her friends. Her mother gave in and handed her the keys. Before leaving, Catalina did two things. The first, she sent her real-time location to her sister, Lucia, who was already at the mall with other friends. The second, she sent a voice message to her boyfriend, telling him she was on her way and asking him to secure a lane for the bowling game when she arrived. She organized everything with the usual nonchalance, with no indication that this message would be her last. But Catalina never arrived at Patio Olmos. Minutes turned into an hour. Then, nearly 2. Her friends began to notice that something was wrong. Catalina was always punctual. A simple traffic jam wouldn't justify her total absence. Worried, they began sending her messages. First texts, then voice messages, then relentless calls. No response. The group, initially trying to stay calm, was overwhelmed by growing concern. One by one, they tried calling her, but the phone only rang without being answered. Then, uncertainty gave way to panic. Something was wrong. The decision to go to the police was made by Lucia, her sister. She and their parents rushed to the Enaudi neighborhood police station where Catalina lived. Normally, disappearances are only considered official after 24 hours, but the family's desperation, along with the influential surname of Marcelo Gutiérrez, made the police act immediately. A few minutes later, the young woman's friends also arrived at the police station. Their expressions were filled with fear, confusion, and a dark sense that something terrible had happened. As the officers gathered preliminary information, a crucial detail emerged. Lucia still had access to Catalina's shared location, but the hope of finding her alive quickly faded. The phone's tracking showed an unexpected location, 2 kilometers from the shopping mall, in a remote area of the Ampliación Kennedy neighborhood. When the police arrived at the location, the truth began to unfold. The Renault Clio was parked at the edge of a dark road. The car showed signs of an attempted arson, as if someone had tried to get rid of the evidence. But the real horror was inside. In the back seat, motionless, lay Catalina Gutiérrez, dead. Her body appeared to have been placed there after the crime. Her face and clothing showed clear signs of violence. From that moment, the investigation was no longer about a disappearance. It was about murder, and the killer was much closer than anyone could imagine. The investigation took a decisive turn when Lucia Gutiérrez, Catalina's sister, recalled a crucial detail: the real-time location her sister had shared before disappearing. It was a key clue, the last signal pointing to her whereabouts before everything turned into tragedy. The first search was unsuccessful. The system no longer showed her live trajectory, as the time limit for the feature had expired. However, the police turned to remote tracking of the iPhone, and a new location appeared on the screen: Pedro Echagüe Street, number 3900, in the Ampliación Kennedy neighborhood. It was an odd place for Catalina to be alone at that hour. a peripheral area surrounded by vacant lots, but with some homes and streetlights nearby. It wasn't a completely desolate area, but it wasn't a place where someone would stop without a specific reason. The police headed to the location immediately. What they found there confirmed the family's worst fears. On the side of the street, in a poorly lit area, the Renault Clio, Catalina's mother's car, was parked. As they approached, the officers noticed burn marks on the bodywork, especially around the doors and hood. The smell of gasoline still lingered in the air. Someone had attempted to set the car on fire, possibly in a desperate attempt to destroy evidence. But the worst was yet to come. When they illuminated the interior of the vehicle with flashlights, the officers found a scene that buried any hope of finding Catalina alive. In the back seat, the lifeless body of Catalina Gutiérrez lay in a position suggesting that it had been transported there after her death. Her face had multiple bruises, signs of a brutal attack. Her clothes were slightly disheveled, but there were no obvious signs of sexual assault, initially ruling out that theory. The intent to set the car on fire indicated that the killer sought to erase evidence, perhaps thinking the flames would hide the crime. However, the fire never spread enough. The news of the discovery reached the police station in a matter of minutes. When Catalina's father received the call, the station was engulfed in a wave of despair. Friends and family, still trying to hold on to hope, collapsed in screams and uncontrollable tears. Among everyone present, one of the most shaken seemed to be Nestor Soto, Catalina's best friend. He cried uncontrollably, hugged the victim's mother, and murmured words of comfort. But something about his attitude caught the attention of the investigators. His grief seemed exaggerated. A few hours later, that suspicion would become the focal point of the case, and the answer to the question, who killed Catalina, would begin to emerge from the shadows. The death of Catalina Gutiérrez was no longer a mystery. It was a brutal homicide that demanded immediate answers. With her body found in the Renault Clio, the police knew the crime hadn't happened there. Catalina had been killed somewhere else and then transported to the wasteland. The crucial question was, who killed her and why? At the Enaudi neighborhood police station, the despair for confirmation of the tragedy was replaced by cold determination. They had to find the culprit. Family members and friends of the young woman were called one by one to an interrogation room. Everyone wanted to help, but no one had clear answers until it was Nestor Soto's turn. Soto, Catalina's best friend, was one of the first to show his distress. From the moment the young woman's death was confirmed, he cried uncontrollably, hugged the family, and offered words of comfort. But when he sat down to give his statement, his behavior began to raise suspicions. There was something strange about him. His voice trembled. He avoided eye contact. He answered with long pauses, as if searching for the right words to avoid contradicting himself. At first, the officers attributed his state to emotional shock, something natural after the violent death of someone so close. But then, inconsistencies began to appear. Nestor's versions didn't match up. He first said he hadn't seen Catalina that day, but then suggested they had communicated by messages. He claimed to have been at home, but a witness said they had seen him somewhere else at the same time. His story had gaps, small details that didn't add up. The police subtly pressed him. They pointed out his contradictions and asked for more detailed explanations. They asked him one last time, "Nestor, what happened with Catalina?" That's when everything changed. Soto completely broke down. His hands trembled, his face turned pale, and in a trembling whisper, he uttered the words no one expected to hear. "She was the love of my life. I killed her." The silence in the room was absolute. The confession fell like a hammer on the officers, but they knew that, although those words were devastating, they weren't enough to convict him. The law required that the confession be corroborated before a judge. In the meantime, the police had to act fast. They needed to prove that Nestor Soto was indeed the killer. What no one suspected was that the evidence would soon reveal something even more chilling. Catalina hadn't died by accident, nor in an impulsive attack. She had been the victim of a meticulous crime, executed with coldness, and the killer, her best friend, had much more to hide. Nestor Soto's confession had changed the course of the investigation. However, justice required concrete evidence to uphold his guilt before a court. With his statement as a starting point, the police had to answer several key questions. How did Catalina die? When did the crime happen? What motivated her killer? The autopsy was the first crucial piece of evidence to reconstruct the truth. The results arrived on the afternoon of July 18th, and the conclusions were as cold as they were horrifying. Catalina had died from mechanical asphyxia. It had not yet been determined if she had been strangled with hands or an object, but the damage to her neck was evident. The report also revealed something even more shocking. She had been brutally beaten before her death. The bruises on her face and torso indicated that her killer had attacked her with excessive violence. The forensic pathologist suggested that the aggression and asphyxiation might have occurred in the same episode, possibly an attack of uncontrollable rage. But that wasn't all. There was something more on her body. Her skin showed post-mortem burns. This confirmed a crucial hypothesis. The killer had attempted to burn her after she had been killed. It wasn't an attempt to cover up the crime at the time of the murder, but an action afterward, possibly to eliminate evidence. With these findings, the police were able to discard some initial theories. There were no signs of sexual violence, indicating that the crime wasn't related to an assault of that type. It wasn't a robbery-homicide. Catalina hadn't been attacked by a stranger on the street, but by someone who knew her. Everything pointed to a personal motive, driven by obsession and extreme emotional imbalance. As the police processed these findings, they began to interview the neighbors from the area where the car was found. Most hadn't seen or heard anything suspicious, but an anonymous testimony opened a new line of investigation. A man claimed to have heard an intense argument around 11 p.m. near the location where Catalina was found. He clearly remembered hearing 3 different voices. And something else. They heard someone talking about setting fire to the car. But when the police arrived at the site, no one was there. If Nestor Soto had acted alone, whose voices were those? Were there other people involved in the crime? Meanwhile, the media and social networks had already turned the case into a national scandal. But many pieces were still missing, and one of them would reveal that Catalina never imagined the danger that was lurking so close to her. As the police gathered evidence against Nestor Soto, social media and the news began to ask an unsettling question: who was really Catalina Gutiérrez's best friend? At first, Nestor's image was that of a normal young man, a 21-year-old architecture student who had moved to Córdoba from Bariloche in 2021. He had adapted well to the city, was sociable, and actively participated in university events. But when investigators began to dig into his past, they found disturbing signs. On social media, Catalina and Nestor appeared together in many photos and videos. They were close friends. They went out in groups, studied together, and shared moments with other classmates. To anyone who saw these posts, they seemed like just 2 friends enjoying university life. However, the bond between them wasn't as simple as it appeared. When the news of the femicide exploded on social media, an ex-schoolmate of Nestor Soto posted a chilling testimony on Twitter. The young woman, who chose to remain anonymous, recounted that years earlier, Nestor had persistently harassed her. According to her account, during a school camp, Soto attempted to win her over, but she made it clear that she had no interest in him. Instead of accepting her rejection, Nestor became obsessed. For months, he tried to get close to her in different ways, ignoring her refusals. When she got tired and decided to confront him directly, the situation worsened. Nestor started bullying her at school, humiliating her in front of other classmates, and creating a constant atmosphere of harassment. The worst part was that she reported the bullying to the school authorities, but no one did anything. Her post ended with a phrase that shocked thousands of people. "Catalina's murder might have been avoided if they had listened to me at the time." But they didn't. But the most disturbing part was yet to come. The young woman revealed a detail that chilled the blood of everyone who read it. On July 18, 2024, just hours after murdering Catalina, Nestor Soto logged into her Instagram and saw her stories, as if nothing had happened, as if she were still the same person as before. The confession from the former schoolmate sparked an outpouring of outrage on social media. Many claimed that Catalina's murder wasn't an impulsive act, but the final manifestation of a dangerous pattern of behavior. But the story didn't end there. While the police were processing this information, Catalina's family began to recall situations that had previously seemed insignificant, but now took on a sinister meaning: persistent messages, unfounded reproaches, episodes of jealousy that didn't correspond to a simple friendship. Catalina never knew that her best friend didn't see her as a friend. The reality was much darker. He saw her as a possession, and when he realized he would never have her, he made the worst decision possible. With Nestor Soto's confession and the revelations about his history of harassment, the police were clear that this was a premeditated crime. However, there were still unanswered questions. How did Nestor manage to take Catalina to the crime scene? When did he attack her? Did he act alone? Security cameras would be the key to reconstructing Catalina Gutiérrez's last night. Investigators began cross-referencing Catalina's phone location with security camera footage from various points in the city. The result was terrifying. Catalina never went directly to Patio Olmos to meet her friends. Instead, she stopped at Nestor Soto's house. The footage showed that around 9:12 p.m., Catalina's mother's white Renault Clio arrived at the building where Soto lived, in the Jardín neighborhood. It remained parked for 38 minutes. Something happened during that time. Forensics had already determined that Catalina had received a brutal beating before her death. And now, the police had a strong suspicion. Catalina was attacked inside Nestor's house. During a search of his apartment, experts found evidence supporting this theory. Catalina's ring on the floor, possibly ripped off during a struggle. Victim's hair on the carpet, indicating she was there at the time of the attack. Nestor's clothes in the washing machine, possibly washed to eliminate blood traces. With this new scenario, the crime took on an even more terrifying nature. Catalina hadn't been kidnapped by a stranger. She had trusted her killer. She had stopped the car, waited for him outside his house, never imagining that inside those walls, her worst nightmare would unfold. Investigators checked a camera located in front of Soto's apartment. The image was clear and disturbing. At 9:38 p.m., the camera recorded Nestor carrying a bundle in his arms. It was Catalina's body. In the footage, you can see how Nestor opens the back door of the Renault Clio and places the body in the seat, exactly in the same position where it was found hours later. There were no doubts. Nestor Soto's apartment was the primary crime scene. Another security camera, located on Ciudad de Valparaíso Avenue, captured the Renault Clio driving at high speed around 10:10 p.m. This was the fastest route from Nestor's house to the deserted area in the Ampliación Kennedy neighborhood, where he abandoned the car with Catalina's body inside. The forensic analysis determined that Catalina was already dead by that time. Soto not only murdered her, but then transported her, manipulated the scene, and tried to cover up the crime. At 11:00 p.m., the last camera captured the vehicle stopped on Pedro Echagüe Street. Minutes later, a shadow is seen walking away from the car and disappearing into the darkness. The most shocking part of the reconstruction was discovering what Nestor did after the crime. He didn't run away. He didn't hide. He didn't show signs of panic. After abandoning the car, he walked back to his house, changed clothes, and headed to Patio Olmos, where Catalina's group of friends was. There, he pretended to be concerned, as if he didn't know what had happened. He asked questions, tried calling the victim along with the others. He played his role until the end. The evidence was overwhelming. Witness testimonies, camera records, and evidence found in his apartment made it clear what had happened that night. Nestor Soto had killed Catalina with his own hands, then tried to dispose of the body and finally return to the group to divert suspicion. But now, the deception was over. Justice had everything necessary to keep him locked up in Bauer Prison, where he would await his trial. The only thing left to discover was whether he really acted alone, or if someone else helped him cover up his crime. With the reconstruction of events and the solid evidence against him, Nestor Soto went from being a simple suspect to being formally charged with aggravated homicide. Initially, the case had been categorized as simple homicide, but after accumulating evidence, prosecutor José Alberto Mana announced a crucial change in the legal classification. The crime would be considered a femicide. The charge became aggravated homicide due to premeditation and gender violence, placing Soto before a possible life sentence. But there was still one question unanswered. Did he act alone? Until that moment, all the evidence pointed to Nestor Soto as the sole responsible for the murder. However, a new finding in the security cameras raised doubts in the investigation. A video recorded at 11:10 p.m., minutes after Soto had abandoned the car with Catalina's body, revealed an unsettling detail. The footage showed that at the intersection of Rimini and Echagüe Streets, just 50 meters from where the Renault Clio was found, a second vehicle appeared parked in the area. What was most disturbing was that, moments after Nestor walked away, from Catalina's car, a person descended from this second vehicle and walked towards the Clio. The video clearly showed that two shadows returned to the suspicious car and entered it before it drove away. Who was that person? Did they help Nestor manipulate the crime scene? Did they know what had happened? Or did they just run into him without suspecting anything? Investigators faced a chilling possibility. Soto may have had an accomplice in destroying evidence. Despite these new images, the prosecution team insisted that, at that moment, there was not enough evidence to confirm the existence of a second accomplice. The prosecutors emphasized that, while they were considering all possible hypotheses, everything pointed to Soto acting alone in the aggression and murder of Catalina. However, the presence of a second vehicle in the scene kept the doubt alive. Catalina's father, Marcelo Gutiérrez, publicly expressed his distrust. "I don't think he acted alone. My daughter didn't get into that car willingly. Someone else was there. Someone else helped cover up what he did." But until justice could prove otherwise, Nestor Soto was the only one detained and the only one responsible for the crime. Meanwhile, investigators awaited a key piece of evidence that could reveal the whole truth. An analysis of Nestor Soto's phone. If there were any calls, messages, or any contact with another person on the night of the crime, they would know soon. And if there was an accomplice, they wouldn't go unpunished. With each new piece of evidence against him, Nestor Soto's fate seemed sealed. However, justice needed a final confirmation. The accused had to ratify or deny his initial confession before a judge. On August 1, 2024, after 2 weeks in Bauer prison, Soto was transferred to the courts in Córdoba for his investigative hearing. He arrived handcuffed with his head down. The interrogation lasted only 28 minutes. His lawyer, Gaston Seinfeld, spoke to the media and confirmed what everyone expected to hear. "My client has admitted to being the author of the crime." Chaun not only didn't retract his original confession, but in a brief, emotionless statement, he again acknowledged his guilt. "I killed her. I ruined Catalina's life. I ruined my own life, and I ruined the lives of our families. I am very sorry." After those words, he refused to answer any more questions. While Soto awaited his trial in prison, the prosecution worked on the last link in the investigation: the analysis of his cell phone. This device could be the final piece of evidence to answer the questions that were still unresolved. Did he plan the crime? Had he communicated with anyone else that night? Was there an accomplice? The forensic team extracted the information from the phone, and according to judicial sources, multiple messages and internet searches were found that could further complicate the defendant's situation. It was discovered that, in the days leading up to the crime, Soto had searched for methods of strangulation and how to erase evidence of a murder. He had also sent obsessive messages to Catalina, reproaching her for leaving him aside, and that she didn't deserve his contempt. The messages showed a clear pattern of emotional manipulation, where Soto tried to make her feel guilty for distancing herself from him. But the most unsettling part was what was found on the night of the crime. At 10:45 p.m., just minutes after, abandoning the car with Catalina's body, Nestor logged into Instagram and saw her stories, as if nothing had happened. That cold, macabre detail made it clear that his remorse didn't exist at the time of the murder. Meanwhile, Catalina's parents continued demanding the maximum sentence for their daughter's killer. Her father, Marcelo Gutiérrez, expressed the family's pain in a heartfelt statement. The biggest shock was that the killer was someone from her closest circle, a friend whom we trusted. No one thinks a friend could do something like this. He also warned other parents about the importance of being aware of toxic and manipulative friendships. Catalina's boyfriend had audios where she was crying because Nestor made her feel guilty. No one took it seriously at the time. If someone had seen those signs, maybe my daughter would still be alive. Catalina's mother, Eleonor Gutiérrez, spoke publicly for the first time and left a phrase that moved the entire country. "We didn't see it coming. We didn't imagine that someone who sat at our table for dinner, who came to watch games with us, could do this." Catalina never knew that Nestor was in love with her. She never thought about it. She trusted him like a brother, and he killed her for that. Today, Nestor Soto remains detained in Bauer prison, awaiting sentencing. The prosecution has requested a life sentence under the charge of aggravated homicide due to premeditation and gender violence, femicide. Catalina's family continues to wait for justice, while her story has become a symbol of the danger of harassment and obsession disguised as friendship. The entire country awaits the verdict, but beyond the conviction, the lesson from this crime is clear. Not everyone who claims to be a friend is one, and sometimes the danger is much closer than we imagine.